The check slides across my kitchen table with the smallest sound, just paper against wood, but it might as well be thunder. 27 years of lies, and it comes down to this. My brother's signature at the bottom, his handwriting still the same messy scrawl from when we were kids fighting over the last piece of birthday cake. Except now we're fighting over something that was never his to take. The morning light catches the zeros, and I count them twice, 3 times, because even now I can't quite believe what I'm seeing. Outside, his car idles in my driveway. He's waiting for an answer, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly what to tell him. My name is Nicole Harper, and 3 weeks ago I buried the only parent I had left. I thought that was the hardest thing I'd have to do this month. I was wrong. The funeral home chapel smelled like lilies and floor polish, that particular cocktail of grief and disinfectant that makes everything feel both sacred and sterile. I sat in the front row, my black dress already wrinkled from clutching the fabric between my fingers, watching people file past Dad's casket like they were on some sort of conveyor belt of condolences. "Beautiful service," they murmured. "He was a good man. So sorry for your loss." I nodded and smiled and thanked them, the same automatic responses I'd been giving for 2 days straight. My throat felt raw from it. Marcus sat beside me, but we might as well have been in different states. My brother had perfected the art of looking present while being completely absent, his eyes focused somewhere just past the casket, his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for a job interview. He'd flown in from Seattle that morning, still wearing his expensive suit from whatever meeting he'd been in, his phone buzzing every few minutes against his leg. "Can you turn that off?" I whispered during a particularly quiet moment. "It's work," he said, not even looking at me. "Some of us can't just drop everything." Some of us. Like I hadn't spent the last 6 months driving back and forth to Dad's apartment, sitting through doctor appointments, learning how to manage his medications when his memory started sliding away from us in pieces. Like I hadn't been the one to find him that Tuesday morning, his coffee still warm on the kitchen counter. The pastor, a kind man Dad had never mentioned but who somehow knew all his favorite hymns, was wrapping up his remarks when I noticed the lawyer. Harold Messick sat 3 rows back, wearing a rumpled gray suit and holding a manila envelope against his chest like it contained nuclear secrets. He'd been Dad's attorney for 30 years, but I'd never seen him look nervous before. Our eyes met, and he gave me the smallest nod toward the exit. "And now we'll have a few words from Daniel's children," the pastor was saying. Marcus stood first, straightening his tie. He walked to the podium with the same confidence he brought to boardrooms, his voice steady and practiced as he talked about Dad's work ethic, his integrity, his love of baseball. All true, but sanitized, like he was reading from a resume instead of talking about our father. When he finished, the chapel fell quiet. I hadn't planned to speak. The pastor had asked, but I'd told him Marcus would handle it, that I wasn't good with crowds, that I'd probably just cry and embarrass myself. But something about the silence felt wrong. Incomplete. I stood up before I could change my mind. The walk to the podium felt like swimming through honey, every step deliberate and strange. I gripped the edges of the wooden lectern and looked out at the faces, Dad's coworkers, neighbors, the woman from the grocery store who always asked about his garden, my high school English teacher who'd somehow heard about the service. My father was a complicated man, I heard myself say, the words coming from somewhere deeper than I'd planned. He kept things close, saved bottle caps in mason jars, and never threw away a birthday card. He remembered the names of every dog on our block but forgot to call me back sometimes. A few people smiled. In the 3rd row, Mrs. Patterson from next door wiped her eyes. He taught me how to change a tire when I was 16, not because I asked, but because he said the world would try to make me dependent on other people, and he wouldn't have that. My voice caught on the last part, but I pushed through. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he loved us the best way he knew how, and he never stopped trying to protect us, even when we didn't know we needed protecting. I don't know why I said that last part. It just felt true, like something was shifting into place even as I spoke the words. When I sat down, Harold was already moving toward the exit. The rest of the service passed in a blur of handshakes and hugs and promises to stay in touch that we all knew wouldn't happen. Marcus disappeared immediately after, probably back to his rental car and his phone calls and his important Seattle life. But I lingered, straightening flowers and collecting the guest book, putting off the moment when I'd have to leave Dad here in this quiet room and drive home to his empty house. "Sarah." Harold appeared at my elbow, the manila envelope still clutched against his chest. "Could we have a word? Privately?" We walked to a small office behind the chapel, just chairs and a desk and a box of tissues that had seen better days. Harold sat across from me, the envelope between us like a third person at the table. "Your father left specific instructions," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "about the timing of certain disclosures." He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded in half. Even from across the desk, I could see Dad's handwriting, the same careful block letters he'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. "This was sealed," Harold continued. "He asked me to give it to you after the service. To you specifically." He was very clear about that. He slid the paper across the desk, but his hand stayed on top of it for a moment. "Sarah, your father was a good man. But good men sometimes make choices that are difficult to understand. Whatever's on this page, remember that he loved both of you. Both of us." The way he said it made my chest tighten. Harold lifted his hand, and the paper was mine. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Dad's handwriting filled the page, not a letter exactly, but a list. Dates and dollar amounts, neat columns that went back years. At the top, in bigger letters, what Marcus took. My breath caught. The amounts weren't small, thousands of dollars, spread across 8 years, starting right after Mom died. Next to each entry, a note in Dad's precise script. Forged my signature on the life insurance check. Used my credit card for his MBA. Took money from the savings account when he thought I wouldn't notice. At the bottom of the page, one final line. The house was supposed to be Sarah's. I told him this. He knows. I read it twice, 3 times. The words rearranging themselves in my mind like puzzle pieces that suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Marcus's expensive suit. His confidence about handling Dad's affairs. The way he'd called me 2 days after the funeral to discuss dividing Dad's assets fairly, like he was doing me some kind of favor. "How long have you known?" I asked Harold, my voice barely a whisper. "Your father showed me this 6 months ago, when his diagnosis became official." Harold's face looked older somehow, weighted down with secrets. He'd been documenting everything, keeping receipts, building a case. He said he didn't want you to have to fight blind when the time came. When the time came. Like Dad had known this moment would arrive, had been preparing me for a battle I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my purse, next to my car keys and the program from Dad's service. Everything felt different now. The chapel, the flowers, the memory of Marcus standing at that podium talking about integrity while knowing exactly what he'd taken. "What do I do with this?" I asked. Harold smiled for the first time since I'd walked into his office, a small, sad expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "That, my dear, is entirely up to you." The drive home from the funeral home took 12 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every red light gave me time to think about that piece of paper in my purse, and every green light made me want to drive past my house and keep going until I ran out of gas somewhere in the next state. Dad's house sat at the end of Maple Street, the same blue vinyl siding and white trim it had worn for 30 years. I'd been staying there since the funeral, sleeping in my old bedroom with its faded flower wallpaper, putting off the inevitable task of going through his things. Now the house looked different somehow, like I was seeing it through new eyes. The house was supposed to be Sarah's. I sat in the driveway with the engine running, staring at the front porch where Dad used to drink his morning coffee and wave at the neighbors. He'd always said the house would be mine someday, but I'd figured that was just dad talk, the way parents promise their kids the moon when they're little. Marcus was the successful one, the one with the MBA and the corner office and the house in Seattle with actual property value. Why would he need this place? My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, heading back to hotel. "We should talk tomorrow about next steps. Dad's affairs are more complicated than I thought." More complicated. Right. I turned off the car and walked up the front steps, my heels clicking against the wood Dad had painted last spring. The house key felt heavier than usual in my hand, like it was made of lead instead of brass. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Dad's coffee mug still in the sink, the newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle he'd been working on the day he died. I'd been avoiding this space, the weight of his absence, but now it felt different. Protective, almost. Like the house itself was on my side. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, my hands moving through the familiar routine while my mind churned. Dad had always been meticulous about money, keeping receipts in a shoebox, balancing his checkbook to the penny every month. I'd helped him organize his papers when he started forgetting things, but I'd focused on the medical bills and insurance forms. I hadn't thought to look for, what? Evidence of theft by his own son? The coffee maker gurgled to life, and I opened my purse. Dad's list sat folded between my wallet and my checkbook, innocent as a grocery list until you actually read the words. I spread it out on the kitchen table and really looked at it this time. The dates went back 8 years, right after Mom's funeral, when we were all raw with grief and Marcus had flown in from business school to help with arrangements. I remembered him being so responsible, so grown up, handling the insurance paperwork while I sat in Mom's garden and cried into her rose bushes. Forged my signature on the life insurance check, $47,000. $47,000. Mom's life insurance policy, the one that was supposed to help Dad with the medical bills from her cancer treatment. Marcus had told us the insurance company was being difficult, that there were complications with the payout, that Dad shouldn't worry about the details while he was grieving. My coffee mug shook in my hands. The memory was so clear now, like watching a movie I'd seen before but never really understood. Marcus at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, telling Dad he just needed to sign a few things, that he'd handle everything. Dad's shaky signature on document after document, trusting his son to take care of business while he tried to figure out how to live without the woman he'd loved for 35 years. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus's hotel. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and professional. "Sarah? Everything okay? I need to ask you something." I kept my voice level, casual. "About Mom's life insurance. Do you remember how much it was?" A pause. In the background, I could hear CNN or some other news channel, the distant murmur of talking heads discussing things that suddenly seemed completely irrelevant. "Why are you asking about that now?" "It was years ago. I'm trying to get Dad's papers organized. There are some discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" His voice had changed, gone careful. I knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used when we were kids and Mom asked who broke her favorite vase. Marcus had always been a good liar, but he had tells. He always got formal when he was scared. "The insurance papers say 47,000, but I can only find records of about 15 coming into Dad's account. I thought maybe there were multiple policies, or, look, Sarah, this is complicated financial stuff. You don't understand how insurance payouts work. There were taxes, fees, the funeral home took their cut directly, $32,000 in fees." The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. "I don't appreciate what you're implying," Marcus said finally. "I'm not implying anything. I'm asking a direct question about Mom's life insurance money. Where did it go?" I handled everything properly. Dad was in no state to deal with financial matters, and you were, I was what? Another pause. I could hear him breathing, probably pacing around his hotel room the way he used to pace around his bedroom when he was in trouble. "You were falling apart," he said finally. Someone had to be the adult. The adult. Like I hadn't been 28 years old with a job and a mortgage and a life that got put on hold so I could take care of our grieving father. Like I hadn't been the one sitting with Dad through every sleepless night, every crying jag, every moment when he forgot Mom was gone and asked me to call her for dinner. "Where's the money, Marcus? This conversation is over. You're being paranoid, and frankly, it's insulting. I flew across the country for Dad's funeral. I'm handling all the estate paperwork, and this is the thanks I get?" "I didn't ask you to handle." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a moment, then set it down next to Dad's list. My hands were shaking again, but not from grief this time. This was something sharper, cleaner. I walked to Dad's study, a small room off the living room where he paid bills and did his taxes every April with the dedication of a monk copying scripture. His filing cabinet sat in the corner, four metal drawers that contained 40 years of careful documentation. I'd never gone through it properly, just pulled out the medical files and insurance information I'd needed for the funeral arrangements. Now I started from the beginning. The top drawer was labeled current in Dad's block letters, but when I opened it, I found files dating back 7 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts for everything from oil changes to prescription medications. And in the very back, a manila folder marked MB in red ink. Marcus Benjamin. My brother's full name. I opened the folder and found photocopies. Dad had copied everything: checks with forged signatures, credit card statements showing charges Marcus had made, bank transfer receipts, even a letter from Marcus asking to borrow money for his MBA with a promise to pay it back within 2 years. The letter was dated 6 years ago. At the bottom of the folder, a yellow legal pad covered with Dad's handwriting. Not just amounts and dates this time, but observations, notes about conversations, a timeline of lies. Called to ask about charge at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Seattle. Marcus said it was a business dinner but credit card was in my name. Bank called about large withdrawal from savings. Marcus said he had permission but I never signed anything. Found checkbook in his luggage when he visited for Christmas. 3 checks missing. Page after page of careful documentation, like Dad was building a case for trial. Each entry was dated, some with times included, all written in the same methodical script he'd used for grocery lists and birthday cards. The last entry was from 3 weeks ago, 2 days before Dad died. Told Marcus about the will. House goes to Sarah. He argued with me for an hour. Said I was being unfair, that he's the one who understands money and property management. Said Sarah couldn't handle the responsibility. I told him it wasn't his decision to make. He left without saying goodbye. I sat back in Dad's desk chair, the folder heavy in my lap. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was walking her dog, the same evening routine they'd been doing for 15 years. Everything looked normal and peaceful. But inside this room I was holding evidence that my brother had spent years stealing from our father. And Dad had known. He'd known everything, documented everything, and he'd been protecting me from the truth until he couldn't anymore. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, flying out early tomorrow. We'll call you next week about dividing Dad's assets. Try to think rationally about this. Rationally. I looked down at Dad's careful notes, his patient documentation of betrayal and theft, and for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Marcus wanted rational? I could do rational. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at Dad's kitchen table with every document from the MB folder spread out in front of me like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that painted the ugliest picture I'd ever seen. By dawn, I had 3 piles, evidence of forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, and what Marcus would probably call misunderstandings but what any reasonable person would call theft. The coffee maker gurgled to life just as my phone started ringing. Harold's name appeared on the screen. I hope I'm not calling too early, he said without preamble. But I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation yesterday. Have you had a chance to review your father's note? I've been reviewing a lot more than that. I looked at the papers covering the table. Harold, how much do you know about Marcus's financial relationship with my father? A long pause. What have you found? Everything. Dad kept copies of everything. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need to know what my options are. Can you be at my office in an hour? Harold's law office sat above a hardware store on Main Street, the kind of place that still had a brass nameplate on the door and file cabinets that had probably been there since the Carter administration. When I arrived, he already had coffee waiting and a yellow legal pad covered with notes. Show me what you found, he said. I laid out Dad's documentation piece by piece, watching Harold's face grow more serious with each forged signature, each unauthorized charge. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and rubbed his temples. Daniel was methodical, Harold said finally. This is better documentation than most fraud cases I've seen. The question is what you want to do with it. What are my options? Well, the statute of limitations has run on some of the earlier incidents, but the more recent ones. He picked up a credit card statement from 6 months ago. This is still actionable. The forged checks, the unauthorized electronic transfers, there's enough here for criminal charges if you wanted to pursue that route. Criminal charges. Against my own brother. What's the other route? Harold smiled, the same small, knowing expression I'd seen at the funeral home. The strategic route. Your father was very specific about his intentions regarding the house. Marcus may think he can contest the will, but with this documentation. He gestured to the papers. Let's just say his legal position becomes significantly weaker when faced with evidence of financial elder abuse. Financial elder abuse. The phrase made my stomach turn, but it fit. Marcus had been taking advantage of Dad's grief, his trust, his gradual cognitive decline. And he'd been doing it for years. There's something else, Harold continued. He pulled out a thick folder from his desk drawer. Your father's actual will. The one Marcus hasn't seen yet. I opened the folder and found 15 pages of legal language that boiled down to something simple. The house, Dad's savings account, his car, and his pension were all mine. Marcus got the boat, a 14-foot fishing boat Dad had bought used 20 years ago and maybe taken out twice. Dad was very clear about his reasoning, Harold said. He felt Marcus had already received his inheritance, in installments, without permission. The will specifically states that all previous loans to Marcus are considered gifts that need not be repaid, but that no additional inheritance would be forthcoming. I read that section twice. Dad had known. Even in his final months, battling memory loss and confusion, he'd been protecting me, making sure I wouldn't have to fight blind when this moment came. When does Marcus find out about this? Typically, we'd read the will within a week of the funeral. I've been waiting for you to be ready. Given what you've discovered, though, I think we should expedite the process. I thought about Marcus's text from the night before, his assumption that we'd be dividing Dad's assets like we were splitting a pizza. His confidence that I'd be grateful for whatever scraps he decided to throw my way. What if we don't tell him about the will right away? What if we let him make his intentions clear first? Harold's smile widened. That's a very interesting approach, Sarah. What did you have in mind? He's flying back to Seattle today, but he mentioned calling me next week about dividing Dad's assets. What if I record that conversation? Let him explain his version of fair division? Washington is a two-party consent state for recording phone conversations, Harold said carefully. But if he were to visit you here in Pennsylvania? I understood. Pennsylvania was a one-party consent state. If Marcus came here to discuss Dad's estate in person, I could record our conversation without his knowledge. How do I get him to come back? Tell him you've found some complications with the estate, financial irregularities that need to be discussed in person. Make him think you've discovered some discrepancies but that you're confused about what they mean. Play up the grieving daughter angle. You're overwhelmed, you need his help to understand Dad's finances. It felt manipulative, using Marcus's own assumptions about my incompetence against him. But then I looked at the stack of evidence in front of me, 8 years of theft disguised as family love, and the guilt evaporated. How long do we have before we're legally obligated to read the will? In Pennsylvania, there's no specific timeline as long as the estate isn't being probated yet. We could reasonably wait another 2 weeks without raising any red flags. 2 weeks. Enough time to let Marcus dig his own grave. I spent the rest of the morning at Harold's office, planning our strategy like we were preparing for war. He gave me a recording app for my phone, showed me how to test the audio quality, and walked me through the kinds of questions I should ask to get Marcus to incriminate himself. The key is to let him talk, Harold said. Don't accuse him of anything directly. Just express confusion about the numbers, ask him to explain where various amounts went. Men like Marcus can't resist the opportunity to explain things to someone they perceive as less intelligent. Men like Marcus. Harold had met my brother exactly twice, but he'd seen this pattern before, the entitled son who viewed his aging parent as an ATM, who convinced himself that he deserved whatever he could take because he was smarter, more successful, more important than the family members left behind to do the actual caretaking. By the time I left Harold's office, I had a plan. More importantly, I had something I'd been missing since Dad died, a sense of purpose. I drove home and called Marcus's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, which meant he was probably on his flight back to Seattle, already putting this whole unpleasant family business behind him until it became necessary to think about it again. I left a message, keeping my voice slightly shaky, confused. Marcus, it's Sarah. I've been going through more of Dad's papers, and I'm finding some things that don't make sense. Some financial irregularities. Nothing major, I don't think, but I'm getting confused about some of the numbers. Could you maybe come back this weekend? I could really use your help figuring this out before we start dividing everything up. I'll pay for your ticket. I don't want to mess anything up. Perfect. Vulnerable but not suspicious. A grieving daughter who'd discovered something but was too overwhelmed to understand what it meant. I hung up and looked around Dad's kitchen. The house felt different now, charged with possibility instead of weighted with grief. For the first time since the funeral, I could see a future beyond just getting through each day. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, sent from somewhere over the Midwest. Got your message. We'll book return flight for Friday. Don't worry about paying for ticket. We'll settle everything when we divide Dad's assets. Try not to stress about the paperwork. These things are always confusing. Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with real adult responsibilities. I smiled and started clearing Dad's papers off the kitchen table. I had 3 days to prepare, and Marcus had no idea what he was walking into. But I did. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of October weather that makes everything look like it's been filmed through a dirty window. I'd spent 3 days preparing for Marcus's return, and Dad's house had been transformed into something between a courtroom and a theater stage. The recording app was tested and ready on my phone, hidden beneath a stack of sympathy cards on the coffee table. I'd practiced the conversation with Harold twice, running through different scenarios until I could play confused and overwhelmed without overacting. The manila folder with Dad's evidence sat in the kitchen drawer, close enough to reference if needed but out of sight for now. I'd even baked muffins that morning, banana chocolate chip, Marcus's favorite since we were kids. The kind of domestic gesture that would reinforce his image of me as the simple sister who took care of everyone else while he handled the important business of making money. His rental car pulled into the driveway at exactly 10:30. Through the front window, I watched him sit for a moment, checking his phone one last time before walking up the path. He'd dressed down for this visit, khakis and a polo shirt instead of his usual suit, but even his casual clothes probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Sarah. He hugged me at the front door, the kind of brief, efficient embrace you'd give a distant relative. Sorry for all the drama this week. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. Grief, like my questions about Mom's life insurance, had been some kind of emotional breakdown instead of a reasonable request for information. Come in. I made coffee. And muffins. His face brightened. The banana ones? God, I haven't had those in years. We settled at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd spread out Dad's evidence just a few days ago. Now it held a plate of muffins, 2 coffee mugs, and my phone lying innocuously next to a pile of sympathy cards. I pressed record as I reached for the sugar bowl. So what's this about irregularities? Marcus asked, biting into a muffin. You sounded pretty stressed on the phone. I've been going through Dad's papers more carefully, trying to get organized for the estate stuff. I kept my voice uncertain, worried. But some of the numbers don't add up. Like, there are these gaps where money should be but isn't. What kind of gaps? Well, like Mom's life insurance. The paperwork says it was for $47,000, but I can only find about 15 coming into Dad's account. And there are these credit card bills for charges I don't remember Dad making. Restaurant bills from Seattle, hotel charges. I let my voice trail off, like I was putting pieces together but couldn't quite make them fit. Marcus set down his muffin. Sarah, Dad's finances were complicated. He had multiple accounts, investment portfolios. You wouldn't necessarily see all the money flowing through his main checking account. But that's just it. I found the statements for his savings account, his CDs, even that old mutual fund Mom started. None of them show large deposits that would account for the missing insurance money. Look. Marcus's voice took on that patient, slightly condescending tone he'd perfected in business school. When Mom died, there were a lot of expenses. The funeral home, medical bills that weren't covered by insurance, tax implications for the life insurance payout. Plus Dad was in no shape to handle complex financial decisions. I took care of all of that so he didn't have to worry about it. You took care of it? Someone had to. Dad could barely function for 6 months after Mom died. You remember what he was like. He forgot to eat dinner half the time, let alone manage a major insurance settlement. I did remember. Dad wandering around the house in his bathrobe at 2 in the afternoon, calling Mom's name and then standing confused in the hallway when she didn't answer. But I also remembered Marcus showing up with his briefcase full of papers, taking charge with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. So where did the money go? I mean, if there were all these expenses. Marcus sighed, like I was a particularly slow student who wasn't grasping basic concepts. The funeral home took $12,000 directly from the insurance payout. There were outstanding medical bills totaling another $8,000. The tax penalty for early withdrawal of some of Mom's retirement funds was about $6,000. Legal fees, estate processing fees. He waved his hand vaguely. It adds up quickly. Legal fees. Harold had told me he'd only charged Dad $300 for updating his will after Mom died. Do you have receipts for all that? Something flickered across Marcus's face, too fast to identify. Receipts? Sarah, this was 8 years ago. Who keeps receipts for that long? Dad did. Dad kept receipts for oil changes from 1987. But I didn't say that. I found some other things too, I said instead. Credit card statements with charges I don't understand. Like this one. I pulled out a single statement from the stack of cards, one of Dad's more recent Visa bills. There's a charge for Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Seattle for $300. Dad never went to Seattle except to visit you. Marcus barely glanced at the statement. Business dinner. I was entertaining a client, and Dad said I could use his card for work expenses. He was always trying to help with my career. But it's dated last March. You'd already been promoted to senior partner by then. Why would Dad be paying for your business dinners? It's complicated, Sarah. Dad understood the investment potential of supporting my career development. The returns to the family were substantial. Returns to the family. I almost laughed. The only returns had been to Marcus's bank account. What about these withdrawals? I pulled out another statement, this one showing electronic transfers from Dad's savings to his checking account, followed immediately by checks written to cash. $5,000 in February, $3,000 in April, another $4,000 in June. All withdrawn as cash. Dad was old school about money. He liked having cash on hand for emergencies. $12,000 in cash? For a man who clipped coupons and bought generic cereal? Marcus's jaw tightened. Look, I don't appreciate this interrogation. Dad's financial habits were his own business. If you're trying to imply, I'm not trying to imply anything. I'm trying to understand what happened to Dad's money so I know what we're working with for the estate division. The word division seemed to relax him. Back to familiar territory, the assumption that we'd be splitting everything 50-50, two dutiful children sharing their father's modest legacy. Right. Of course. He reached into his polo shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Actually, I've been thinking about that. I put together a preliminary assessment of Dad's assets. He unfolded the paper and smoothed it on the table. It was typed, professional looking, the kind of document he'd probably create for his corporate clients. The house is worth about $220, according to recent comparable sales in the neighborhood. Dad's checking and savings accounts total approximately $38,000. The car's probably worth $8,000, maybe $10,000 if we find the right buyer. His pension has a survivor benefit that should pay out around $45,000. I looked at his neat columns of numbers, his confident valuations. That seems like a lot of research for someone who just flew in yesterday. I've been thinking about this since Dad got sick. It's important to be prepared for these situations. He tapped the paper with his finger. The total estate value is roughly $310, maybe $320. Split 50-50, that's about $160,000 each. 50-50. There it was, the assumption that had been driving his confidence all week. And you think that's fair? A 50-50 split? Of course it's fair. We're his children. Equal shares for equal relationships. Equal relationships. I thought about the 8 years of stolen money, the forged signatures, the credit card charges for expensive dinners while Dad ate canned soup and called it good enough. I thought about the nights I'd spent in this house, helping Dad remember how to use the microwave, driving him to doctor appointments, listening to him talk about Mom like she was still coming home from the grocery store. What about the money that's missing? If there really are irregularities, shouldn't we figure out what happened before we divide anything? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face like he was trying to read a foreign language. Sarah, what exactly are you suggesting? This was it. The moment when I could still back down, accept his version of events, take my 50% and pretend I'd never found Dad's careful documentation of betrayal. Instead, I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. I'm suggesting that maybe Dad's finances aren't as complicated as you want me to believe, I said quietly. I'm suggesting that maybe someone took advantage of a grieving old man who trusted the wrong person. Marcus's expression went very still. Be very careful what you say next, Sarah. But for the first time all week, I wasn't careful at all. Or what, Marcus? You'll steal from me too? The silence after my accusation stretched like a held breath. Marcus's face cycled through expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling into something cold and unfamiliar. You're grieving, he said finally. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Dad kept records, Marcus. Copies of everything. Every forged signature, every unauthorized withdrawal, every credit card charge you thought he wouldn't notice. That's ridiculous. Dad was losing his memory. His memory was fine when it came to money. You know that. I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer, pulling out the manila folder. He documented everything. For 8 years. I dropped the folder on the table between us. Marcus stared at it like it was a live snake. 8 years of theft, I continued. Starting with Mom's life insurance and never stopping. Even after Dad got sick, even when he was struggling to remember your name some days, you were still taking from him. Marcus opened the folder with hands that shook just slightly. I watched his face as he flipped through Dad's careful documentation, the photocopied checks, the credit card statements, the timeline of lies written in Dad's precise handwriting. This proves nothing, he said, but his voice had lost its confidence. These are just Misunderstandings. Dad gave me permission to forge his signature? To use his credit card without telling him? To withdraw thousands of dollars from his savings account? I picked up one of the photocopied checks. This is your handwriting, Marcus, not Dad's. He looked at the check for a long moment, then closed the folder. You don't understand the full situation. Dad needed help managing his finances. He asked me to handle things for him. He asked you to steal from him? I never stole anything. Marcus's voice rose, then caught itself. He glanced around the kitchen like he was remembering where he was. Everything I took was a loan. I always planned to pay it back. With what? Your good intentions? I sat back down, feeling strangely calm. Dad's been dead for a week, and instead of paying anything back, you're here trying to convince me we should split his estate 50-50. Because we should. We're family. Family. The word hung between us like a bad joke. You're right, I said. We are family. Which makes what you did even worse. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture he'd used as a kid when Mom caught him lying about broken windows or missing homework. Look, Sarah, we can work this out. Whatever you think happened, I know what happened. The question is what we do about it. I could see him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out how much I actually knew and how much damage it could do. His eyes kept drifting to my phone, still lying innocuously next to the sympathy cards. What do you want? He asked finally. I want you to acknowledge what you did. I want you to admit that you stole from our father while he was grieving Mom's death and later while he was sick and vulnerable. I can't admit to something that isn't true. Then I guess we're done here. I reached for my phone, but Marcus leaned forward quickly. Wait, what are you doing? Calling Harold, Dad's lawyer. We're reading the will tomorrow morning, and I think he should know about these financial irregularities before we proceed with the estate. Sarah, don't do anything hasty. Let's think about this rationally. There was that word again. Rational. Like I was being emotional and unreasonable for objecting to 8 years of systematic theft. I have been thinking about it. All week, actually. I scrolled to Harold's number on my phone. I've been thinking about how Dad used to worry about money after Mom died. How he'd clip coupons and shop the clearance racks while you were charging $300 dinners to his credit card. Those were business expenses. I've been thinking about how he started forgetting things, getting confused, and instead of protecting him, you saw an opportunity. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the kitchen window. You have no idea what kind of pressure I was under. The MBA program, the job market, trying to build a career, so you decided to build it with Dad's money. It was an investment. In my future, in the family's future. Everything I achieved would benefit all of us eventually. How did it benefit Dad? How did your success help him when he was sitting here alone, eating canned soup for dinner because he was afraid to spend money on groceries? Marcus spun around. That's not my fault. You could have visited more, helped him. I did help him. I spent every weekend here for 2 years. I took him to every doctor appointment, managed his medications, sat with him during the bad nights when he forgot Mom was dead and kept asking when she was coming home. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. And while I was doing that, you were systematically robbing him. The kitchen fell quiet except for the steady tick of Dad's wall clock, the same clock that had marked time through our entire childhood. Marcus stood by the window with his back to me, his shoulders rigid. What do you want? He asked again, softer this time. I thought about Dad's note, his final message about protecting me from a fight he knew was coming. I thought about Harold's advice, about criminal charges and legal consequences and all the ways I could destroy Marcus if I wanted to. But I also thought about what Dad would want, not revenge, but justice. Clean and final. I want you to write a check, I said, for every penny you took. With interest. Marcus turned around slowly. How much? I pulled out a calculator and started adding. The life insurance money, the credit card charges, the cash withdrawals, 8 years of compound interest at market rates. The number that came up made my breath catch. $137,000. Marcus's face went white. I don't have that kind of money. Then you'll figure out how to get it. Sell your house, liquidate your retirement accounts, take out loans. I don't care how you do it. And if I don't? I held up my phone. I have a recording of this entire conversation. You've admitted to taking Dad's money, justified it as loans you never intended to repay, and tried to manipulate me into giving you half of an estate you've already plundered. His eyes went to the phone, then to my face. You recorded me? Dad taught me to be prepared for people who might try to take advantage. Turns out it was good advice. Marcus sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. You're destroying our family. Our family was destroyed the first time you forged Dad's signature. I'm just cleaning up the mess. We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, Mrs. Patterson walked by with her dog, the same peaceful routine that had continued through Dad's illness, his death, and now this reckoning. Life going on, indifferent to the small betrayals and private justice happening inside these walls. Finally, Marcus looked up. I'll need time to arrange the funds. You have 30 days. 30 days? That's impossible, then you'd better get started. He stood slowly, like an old man, though he was barely 35. What about the estate? The will reading? Oh, we're still doing that. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, Harold's office. I smiled, feeling something settle into place inside my chest. I think you'll find it very educational. After Marcus left, I sat alone in Dad's kitchen with the evidence of his betrayal spread across the table and my phone still recording silence. The house felt different again, not empty anymore, but full of possibility. That afternoon, Marcus's check arrived by courier. $137,000, his signature bold and angry across the bottom. I held it up to the light, examining the blue ink that would finally balance 8 years of carefully documented theft. A car door slammed in the driveway. Marcus, returning from the bank, probably hoping for some final negotiation, some way to minimize the damage to his carefully constructed life. The check slides across my kitchen table with the smallest sound, just paper against wood, but it might as well be thunder. 27 years of lies, and it comes down to this. My brother's signature at the bottom, his handwriting still the same messy scrawl from when we were kids fighting over the last piece of birthday cake. Except now we're fighting over something that was never his to take. The morning light catches the zeros, and I count them twice, 3 times, because even now I can't quite believe what I'm seeing. Outside, his car idles in my driveway. He's waiting for an answer, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly what to tell him. I fold the check carefully and put it in my purse, next to Dad's keys and the program from his funeral. Then I walk to the front door and open it. Marcus sits in his rental car, engine running, waiting to see if I'll call Harold, if I'll destroy his reputation along with his bank account. We're done here, I call out to him. Don't come back. He drives away without looking at me, and I stand on Dad's porch, my porch now, watching his taillights disappear around the corner. Mrs. Patterson waves from her garden, and I wave back, feeling the weight of the check in my purse and the lightness of finally knowing exactly who I am. The daughter who stayed. The daughter who fought. The daughter who won.